In the previous lesson, I discussed the formation of prices. In that lesson, we found that the logic of human action implies that any exchanges that take place are expected, at least by both parties agreeing to the exchange, to be mutually beneficial. We also discovered that prices arise naturally as a result of these exchanges. However, I didn't yet explain how products come to exist in the first place. So, in Lesson 3, I'm going to devote some time to discussing production, as founded on the logic of human action. Let's start with a very simple example. Consider Robinson Crusoe, who's on an island all by himself. He decides that he'd kind of like to eat a fish. Now, we all know that the fish is unlikely to appear in Crusoe's mouth already cooked, just because he wants to eat it. Rather, Crusoe is going to have to catch the fish, and that will require labor. Naturally, there are a number of ways that Crusoe could try to catch the fish, but for simplicity, let's say that the best way, as far as Crusoe is concerned, is to collect a stick, whittle a fishing spear, and then use that to spear the fish. After he gets the fish, to turn it into a usable meal, he'll have to build a fire and cook it. Alright, so Crusoe's decision comes down to this. Is it worth all this trouble just to eat a fish? Now, to answer that question, Crusoe has to consider his next best option. Say that he can easily collect berries, edible berries, that grow all over this island where he's stranded, and that these are the other possibly desirable option for Crusoe. So Crusoe has to decide, would he rather go through this long, labor-intensive process to be able to eat a fish, or would he rather just collect berries and eat them? Now, I suppose we could throw in a third option, where he doesn't eat at all and just lies around lazily on the beach until he dies of starvation. We'll ignore that option. So the choice brings up two important points. First, the decision is going to rest on the value of the product. If Crusoe really loves fish, he might think it's worth the extra work to get them. Now, if he's a vegetarian or just doesn't like fish, he'll think about catching a fish and quickly dismiss that as the less attractive option. He doesn't even like fish. Why would he even eat them? Now, second, the decision will also rest on the value of leisure. That is, all this time that Crusoe is having to invest getting things together to catch the fish is time that he won't be able to spend sitting around on the beach reading Robert Louis Stevenson. If Crusoe greatly values that leisure time, he might be willing to put up with just eating berries. So, production is a somewhat complex decision. But the complexity comes not from the nature of the decision. Just like any, it's just a comparison of different alternatives. The complexity comes from the nature of the options being decided between. That is, Crusoe can't decide just to eat a cooked fish. If he's going to eat the fish, he has to collect the stick, make the spear, spear the fish, make the fire, and cook the fish. Now, this example here also demonstrates the concept of stages of production and the concept of capital goods. Production takes place across time, and each part of the production process leads to the next one. Now, finding the stick makes it possible to make the spear. Also, there are goods here that serve as capital. That is, they are produced not to be consumed, but simply to get Crusoe his final desire, eating this cooked fish. Now, some examples of capital goods in this example include the unwhittled stick, the spear, uncooked fish, and the fire, and everything that goes into making the fire. All of these are capital goods. That is, they're not directly serving Crusoe's desire of eating this fish, but they're used to get him to that point. Now, in the process, a significant role is being played by expectations. After all, the taste of the cooked fish is actually very far removed in time from the decision to start looking for a stick that would make a good spear. So before he sets out, Robinson must expect that there's a good spear-making stick not too far away, otherwise he'll underestimate the labor required for getting the fish. He has to have some expectation that he can actually whittle this stick into a suitable spear. He has to expect that the fish will be in shallow enough water and that his spearing skills are good enough that he'll actually be able to spear a fish. He has to expect that the fish won't be poisonous. There are expectations all through this decision, and that makes it very possible that Robinson's going to be wrong. Actually, let's consider one such case. Let's say that Robinson goes through the process, spears a fish, just to discover, fortunately before he eats it, that the fish is a poisonous variety. In that case, in hindsight, he wasted his time. Or did he? After all, just because the first fish he caught was poisonous doesn't mean that they all are. And now, Robinson's cost for spearing another fish is much reduced from spearing the first. After all, he already has the spear. He doesn't have to make it all over again just to spear a second fish. All he has to do is throw away the poisonous fish and try again. So in this case, Robinson's error didn't actually cost him very much. He just wasted a little bit of time spearing the wrong fish. But he can continue to pick up from where he left off, continue spearing fish. So, building the spear wasn't a waste of time. Just spearing that one fish was. However, say that he discovers that all the fish near the island are poisonous varieties. In that case, he did waste his time making the spear, unless he can use it for some other purpose, like spearing wild pigs. But, more generally, the severity of error-related waste depends on how specific the capital is. That is, if the capital has a very specific use, if the spear is only good for catching fish, then it's far more likely that there's going to be a total waste in the case of error. But if the spear is more generally usable, that is, it can be used to spear anything, then it's much less likely to be a waste, or at least very much of a waste. Now, everything we've said here can easily be transferred to production in a market economy. However, in this case, production is usually to be sold, and the proceeds are what is used for consumption. So when an entrepreneur does decide to produce something, they have to predict what their revenues will be, what any cost may be as this production process unfolds over time, and if they expect that the consumption that they can get from their profits will be more valuable than any effort or waiting that they have to put forth to organize this production process and see it through to completion. If the profits are going to get consumption that is more valuable than that effort, then they're going to undertake it. Now here, prices are going to play a very significant role. After all, the expected price of the product determines the entrepreneur's expected revenues. And the expected prices of factors will determine the entrepreneur's expected costs over the course of the production process. Now each of these prices are determined, just like we talked about last time, by the preferences of the purchasers and sellers in each of these markets. So if the product is extremely valuable, then prices, revenues, and profits are likely to be very high. After all, people are lining up to buy this thing and are willing to pay very high prices for it. If the factors are very, very valuable, for example, to other entrepreneurs, and if it's valuable to other entrepreneurs, odds are it's a high-value factor because it's being used to produce high-value products by these other entrepreneurs. So, if the factors are very highly valuable, costs are going to be very high, which means your profits will be low. So in a market economy, we'd expect that you'll earn the highest profits if you're an entrepreneur that takes low-valued factors that are very cheap, therefore your costs are low, and you use them to produce very high-valued products that are very expensive, so you have high revenue. High revenue, low costs, mean you'll make big profits. On the other hand, if you're an entrepreneur that takes very high-valued factors and produces low-valued products, you're going to be punished with very low profits. You'll have huge costs, very little revenue. You might even take losses, perhaps huge ones. Now, generally, we would expect that the good entrepreneurs, those that are earning profits, will drive out the bad ones. After all, you can't take losses forever. So over time, the market should move toward producing the high consumer value products. So, production decisions are fundamentally no different than any other. That is, they are based on preferences in deciding what is the highest value for the consumer, the ones making the decision ultimately. Now, in the market economy, profits and losses are what guide entrepreneurs to produce those things that people most desire. Profits and losses are themselves the result of prices. And we know that prices come from exchange, exchanges are the result of preferences, and as we noted in the very first lesson, the reality of preferences derives from the reality of human action.